So I'm just going to go ahead and admit it. I am not a handyman. I am not good at it. I've learned how to do a few things to make sure that things are done around the house. But for the most part, I call someone that is a professional at doing what they do best. Plumbing, electrical, all of these things, I call those that know how to do it. So many a times I've gone to try to fix something and I go to use my drill and it's dead. I forgot to charge the battery. Or I go to cut my grass and use the weed whacker and the lawnmower and I forgot to charge the battery. And there's no power in the actual item that I want to use. So I have to wait, get it charged, so forth and so on. So I want to talk to you about power. And the question is, where's the power? You know, as I think about power, I'm reminded of a story of a missionary named Herbert Jackson. And he was teaching in a seminary class, a missions class. And in this class, he began to share with his students how when he was first a missionary, he was given a car that only would run with a push. And so because of that, he decided that near his home, he would go to a school there and use some of the kids, the students that were there to help him, give him a push. And as he would go around doing his rounds as a missionary, he would either park it on a hill or he would just leave the car running because he just didn't want to deal with the issue that this car needed this push in order to run. Fast forward, within the 2 years that he was doing this, Dr. Jackson got sick. And so a new missionary was sent to take over. And as he was kind of pruning and helping the young missionary, showing him the ropes, so to speak, he reminded him, hey, this is a car I inherited. It only runs if you give it a push. And so as he was talking, the missionary that was being introduced, a younger missionary, popped the hood, looked in it, and he said, Dr. Jackson, I'm sorry, but it looks like the issue may just be this loose cable. Sure enough, connected the cable, closed the hood, went around to the driver's side, turned on the car, and it turned on immediately. So the whole problem could have been solved with just connecting a loose cable. Sometimes we try to do things in our life, especially as men, with power that is not there. There's a loose cable. We're trying to go about trying to figure things out on our own abilities, our own strength, our own resources. We try so many different doors that we knock on because of people that we know or resources that we think are going to help us along the way, just to find out that truly we are just powerless. But the Bible reminds us that we have access to power and power that will help us along the way. And it reminds me of the time when Jesus was sharing the story about him being the vine in John chapter 15. And I'll read to you from John chapter 15 from the New Living Translation, which says in verse 1, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so they will produce even more. See, in order for us to tap into the power that we need to survive in this life as men is to recognize, number one, that Jesus is the true grapevine. There are other grapevines that are being tantalizing in front of our faces like carrots to a rabbit, where we want to go for that because we want to try to figure things out. We've been wired as men to conquer, to go and get it. We have been wired to be winners. And because of that, we're always trying to be winners on our own strength and our own knowledge and our own will. And Jesus reminds us that there are a lot of vines out there that are being tantalizing to you in front of your face. And it's so tempting to go with that. But I am the true vine. Jesus reminds us that he is the true vine, meaning that there are false vines. All of those resources, the connections, the people we know, all of those things are not truth. And we depend on them as if they are true. We depend on them as if they are powerful, but we find out they remain powerless as we remain powerless. And Jesus goes on to say, you have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. He is saying not only do you have to acknowledge that I am the true vine, but you also have to acknowledge that you have to stay connected to me. See, God looks at us and sees the areas in our lives where we need to be pruned. He sees the areas in our lives where we need a little chipping away and cutting away so that we become the people, the men that God has called us to be. The point and the objective of our lives here on earth is to be like his son, to look like his son Jesus. And so God, seeing the areas that are not looking like his son, he begins to prune. He begins to cut away relationships. He begins to cut away pride. He begins to cut away all of these little things that we tend to ignore. But he sees, and he's saying, recognize that my son is the true vine, and that all of those things that you're depending on are false. But secondly, also recognize your need to remain in me. How do we remain in him? He says it. He says, you remain in me because you've heard the words. You've heard what has been said. And you may be saying, well, I haven't heard. Well, the Bible is a resource. And I'm holding my phone, and the Bible that I'm reading from to you is from my phone. Yes, the same phone that you get your ESPN, the same phone that you get the apps that you like to access, the same phone that you like to look at stuff that's inappropriate. That phone has the power of giving you the YouVersion app, the Bible app, in different versions. And I even have mine highlighted. It gives you the opportunity to highlight it, to put comments. It's a resource. The words that he has already given, Jesus saying, is his word. And we go to it because we need to remain in him. We acknowledge that he's the true vine. We remain in him by staying in his word, by being reminded of what he has already said. And in verse 5, he says, yes, I am the vine. You are the branches. Let's get this straight. You are not God. You are not enough for yourself. You need me. You are the branches. I am the vine, Jesus said. You depend on me. He goes on to say, those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. So firstly, we recognize that he is the true vine. There are other vines, but those vines are fake. Secondly, we recognize that we need to remain in him, and we do that by staying in his word. And thirdly, we recognize that when we remain in him, we produce fruit. And we recognize that he is the vine. We are the branches. And because of that, we can produce fruit. You see, I've heard this preached in so many different times and ways, and I've heard how sometimes it is misunderstood that God is actually asking us to bear fruit. He's not asking us to bear fruit, because if we remain in him, that is the the byproduct of remaining in him, we bear fruit. It is a principle that has been applied from the beginning of Genesis, that everything will bear or produce fruit according to its kind. So if our kind is remaining in him, then we're going to bear the fruit that shows that we've remained in him. In the Old Testament, when Moses would go up to the mountain, he would come back down having to cover his face with a veil, because he had been with God. He had heard from God, and the glory of God was so glorious that it would shine, and there was a splendor, and people could not look at Moses' face because of the power that was in him. The power that was displayed through his face because of the experience he had remaining in the presence of God. See, we're not called to bear fruit. We are called to remain in him. Big difference. We're not called to forcefully or do these things that produce things and other things. No. We're not called to do that. We produce things, and we do these things bearing fruit because we've been remaining in him. It is a byproduct of the time that we have been spending with him. Now you might be thinking, well, I work, I have a family, I'm going to school, I have all these different things. I don't have time to be in his presence. Well, maybe the whole concept of being in his presence is off. See, I'm not talking about being on your knees or going to a secret place or being at the church or praying for hours. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about getting in his word and meditating in it, as the psalmist said, day and night, so that our roots are deeply rooted in him. So that when there's a false narrative, when there are false beliefs that are bombarding our thought process, that we're not good enough, that we don't even know who we are, that all of these things that the enemy tries to put in our minds and in our brains, thinking that we don't have what it takes to be his children. We don't have what it takes to be men of God. Those false ideologies have to fall, because we've remained in him, and his word is true, and the truth sets us free. We remain in him, and because of that, we bear fruit. And that fruit that we bear is fruit that lasts. That means that people that we know benefit, people that will know our children will benefit, and our children's children, because it's fruit that remains. My question to you is, are you remaining in him? Are you taking out time to meditate in what he has already said, his word, day and night? Are you reflecting on your life and the resources that you tap into? Are you reflecting on these things? Where you get your power? Where's the power? Where's your source? We have so many resources, but where's your source? Jesus says, I am the true vine. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear fruit. And my Father is pruning and cutting away all those things that come in between you remaining in me and I in you. God bless you.